I'm Miko Pawlikowski, and this is HockeyStick. Today, we're looking into testing software and how it's being affected by generative AI. How useful is it? Can it write your tests for you? Are software testing jobs at risk? To answer all these questions, I'm joined by Mark Winteringham, the author of AI-Assisted Testing, his most recent book, as well as testing web APIs. Mark has 15 years of experience testing software and is a quality engineer at John Lewis. Welcome to this episode, and thank you for flying HockeyStick. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. And yourself?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. Nobody asked me that. Or maybe we just cut it every time. Mark, you are probably the most testy person I've spoken to on this show. Would you like to give us a quick overview of how does one end up as a software tester? And what drove you to get where you are?
So yeah, it's a good question because it's one of the reasons why I love testing so much is because there's no clear path into software testing. Well, it certainly wasn't when I started, and I still think it's patchy compared to if you're a developer, you can go do a computer science course and move that way. So my running joke is that I wasn't supposed to be a tester. I was supposed to be a rock star, and it all went a bit wrong. So I studied music at university. I wanted to write music for video games. I had heard to get in the games industry, the best way was through testing. And although I did a lot in music, I was always like a lifelong user of computers. I was always like building things. And I think I built my first basic program when I was 7 on an Atari 400. So I was always interested in computers as well. So my first job was actually testing music software. I had enough knowledge of computers and enough knowledge of music, because I could read it to an advanced degree, to basically test software that was like a word processor for music notation. And it was from there that I started as a junior tester. I went through some more official accreditation stuff, and I realized actually it was quite an enjoyable space to be in because I really liked the sort of discovery and analysis from it. And then fairly early on, I was lucky enough that I had a mentor that kind of showed me more about the automation side of things. And from there, my abilities with software development kind of grew. I had a moment where I had to choose, do I stay in software development or do I go back into composition? And then I met a few composers who wrote music for film, and I heard how much they were earning. So I decided to stay in software development.
Well, a quick reality check, and that's
Yes.
kept you in the game.
Yeah, like to be fair as well, I've always been passionate about testing. I've always been passionate about quality. I think it's a really interesting job because you get all these different people from different places. I've worked with ex-biochemists, ex-Navy engineers, first-line support people, other musicians, a lot of linguists as well. It pulls people in from different places, and some are more drawn to the technical side, some are more drawn to the people side of things. The role of a tester is as much about the psychology of us as individuals in our teams as it is about understanding the technical aspects of how our systems work and what's new in the development space.
Wow. So is it safe to say that you're a testing rock star and you wanted to be a music rock star initially?
I have joked that sometimes that I've managed to go on tour through conferences and probably had better rooms than if I would have been a rock star. Been in some van in the back of a festival stage somewhere where it was pouring with rain. So I've skipped all that part and went to the nice bit with the nice rooms and conferences where you get free food.
So I started as a software engineer, and then I veered off the path and ended up doing a lot of site reliability engineering, working with distributed systems and stuff like that. We all know that we should be testing, and to varying degrees, some people are more relaxed about that, some less, depending on which domain they're working. So I've worked in finance for like last decade, which has its own constraints. I imagine if you work on a nuclear plant, you probably have even more strong thoughts about that. But I've not met many people whose actual job it is to be a quality engineer / tester of things. So tell me how that works. What does a day in life of a tester look like?
I think there's the perspective of what testers do outside of testing. And sometimes we do a bit of a bad job of kind of communicating our actual value. So there is always this perspective that testers just run test scripts They write test scripts, run them and execute them, and then observe some stuff. But I think modern holistic driven testers, each day could be very different. There are days where you are focused purely on exploratory testing. So you've been given some part of a feature or some part of the product to look at, and you're just running lots of exploratory tests, using your critical and lateral thinking skills to guide where you focus your attentions, and then using oracles. So this is where like the psychology of things come into play. So using oracles, using heuristics to determine if there are issues and reporting them back. Another day, it could be that you are sitting with the team and we are trying to work out the requirements for some sort of feature. And we're having more conversations around something that we haven't built yet. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to make sure that everyone is on the same sort of page. So dispelling any misconceptions, challenging any assumptions, really drilling into the value of what it is that we're building. So everyone comes out and understands what it is that we're building. And then other days it's in the automation world. So you're building automated tests, maintaining things, reacting to pipelines and stuff. You mentioned things like SRE. I think that's coming more and more into the testing quality space. And for me, I see that SRE is under the same umbrella. It's still part of like that continuous testing model. It's just obviously your attentions are much more in production and what's going on there. But there are people I know that have very much been drawn to that side, and they're only testing in production, and they're observing, using monitoring and observability tools to sort of see how things are working. Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes the job so interesting, is that there is no typical day. You're doing all these different types of things because you're thinking about quality at every point throughout the life cycle of a feature, of a product as well. And then also you may be a coach, so you may be advocating for quality mindset. You were saying that we all think we should test, we might not be able to do it, or for some reason there's some sort of barrier. So it's helping teams with that as well. So encouraging people to test, encouraging people to advocate for quality as well. So yeah, it's an interesting mix, I find, and that's what makes it so appealing for me.
So is there a particular proportion of how much, because I can picture you doing this teaching part and I guess instilling some of this way of thinking into different teams and then going on your merry way. Or I could also picture you coming in as a consultant where someone brings you in and is like, oh, we're terrible at testing, come help us test our stuff better. Which is closer to the reality of that? Do teams who don't necessarily have a dedicated quality engineer person, do they bring external people to do that? Do they bring you to teach them how to do it? Or do they just read your book and become enlightened and they know their ways from their own?
Transcend to another level, yes. So I think context plays a real key in there. A thing I talk a little bit about what the state of not just testing, but software development in general, is that I see it on a spectrum. Sometimes you could be working with sort of cutting edge team, and I don't mean just the technology, but just like their ways of working. So they're very much all advocates for quality. So your role there is spotting the little opportunities and stuff. You don't have to sell quality, you don't have to sell testing. So you're more there, oh, here's a place that we can improve. Here's a place we can improve. But then you can have teams on the complete other side of the scale. Some people are probably still just starting their agile transformation. Others are many years deep into it. So for those who are maybe further on the other end of the spectrum, then the role will be more advocating for quality, advocating through testing. And then I think it drills down to who the type of person is. I know people who like the coaching and mentoring side. So they've got the skills to convince people to adopt certain practices and start thinking about risk, start addressing risk in different ways. My personal preference is through showing, because I like doing the testing. I like being the advocate for quality and basically using that as an inherent demonstration of why these things are worthwhile doing. Oh, quality looks like it's improved because we started doing exploratory testing. Oh, then maybe we should do more of it, or make sure that there's a clear space for that. So I think different people come at it from different angles. Different states of teams are going to have different requirements as well. It is kind of almost that kind of consultancy answer of it depends, because context is so important. What I'm talking round about is the concept of testability. So if your testability is poor, then you're going to have to make certain choices to improve it. Whereas if your testability is high, which is basically your ability to test, if it's high, then there's less friction and there's more opportunity. So depending where you are on that scale, you've got to pick and choose what's the approach to take.
In a nutshell, what makes for good testing? What does good testing look like?
Critical and lateral thinking. It's something where you are almost taking yourself out of. It's funny. Empathy is an important aspect. You have to be empathetic towards the end user or stakeholders. So understanding what quality means for them and advocating for it, but also it means taking yourself out of it. So not thinking about how you would like to see things done or how you would like to see it built. An actual concrete example of that is you can sometimes have people in the sort of testing quality space who become either gatekeepers of what testing is done, or they become really entrenched in certain bugs need to be fixed. We can't release with that. Whereas I tend to go with the attitude of, I've raised these things, I've raised these attentions to the team, and as a team, we make the decision. So there's that kind of collaborative thing as well. It's about empathy for your end user, taking yourself out of the equation and using your critical and lateral thinking skills to really see what's actually going on rather than what you think is going on. And yeah, being collaborative, like with the team and supporting the team rather than getting in the way, which sometimes happens.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this as well, because I imagine that this creates this weird dynamic where you're there to basically criticize other people's work to a certain extent, which is basically part of the job. How do you make sure that goes smoothly? Because we all say that we want feedback, but in reality, people really don't. What's the tips that you do to handle that better with the teams?
I find debriefs really useful. So I've mentioned exploratory testing a few times, and one aspect of exploratory testing is the concept of debrief. So you'll show what testing you've done to someone else, but also you'll raise issues that you found. I tend to go in with a sort of kind of informal manner of, hey, these are these things that I found. I think there's something that's not quite right here, but I'd like you to validate my testing spidey sense. So you're inviting people into the conversation rather than going, it's rather than saying, holding a piece of paper, I'm going, look what you've done as well. I would never call myself a software developer because I've never worked as a developer professionally, but I've built a lot of software in my spare time. I think also, again, there's an empathy factor there. I understand that mistakes are made. I understand that we misinterpret requirements or we start down one path but somehow find ourselves down another. So it's that appreciation as well. We're all human after all. I think inviting people in, being collaborative and just treating each other with respect, I think can really go a long way to just make that whole process easier. Also as well, just being positive as well. Testing is about like sharing what the state of the product is and what the state of our perspective of what we want to build is. So you should share everything. Recently, we had a win in our team, and I highlighted it to the team because I was like, hey, this is a win. This is really good. You try and fight that perspective of being the negative person by also sharing good information. Happy information can be really useful as well.
Good advice. I need to stop barging in with my top 10 list of stupid mistakes I found in your code list. It'll probably help.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got that. And then in the other part of the room, there's this little elephant that we should address in the form of AI. That seems to be this wrecking ball that just goes from one industry to another and threatens people and tells them that they don't need to do the things they were doing for ages the way they're doing them. And they can do them better. So let's just jump straight into it on the impact of AI on testing. Why is it a big deal and what does it mean?
I think it's one thing to highlight is that AI in testing isn't something that's new. When we start thinking about AI, what are we talking about? Are we talking about all the stuff that's been coming out over the last 2 years around like generative AI and large language models? Are we talking about like visual AI that's been around for almost a decade now that's used for visual comparison testing? Are we talking about some of the recommender algorithms that are created that help with all of this unbreakable tests and stuff that find self-healing tests? It's been there for a while. I think what's different with the generative stuff is the nature in which it interacts with us. It feels human. It's not. And I want to make that very clear from the start. But it feels human. And because it's communicating to us through natural language, it's so easy to anthropomorphize it as well. I think there's that. Then there's also the factor as well that these things are generalized systems. So they can be applied in lots of different ways. And as I said, testing is this weird sort of mix of different general skill sets. So there's that feeling that because it's putting in the same way as we are, that it is very much like us. I don't believe that is the case. And that's something to keep in mind. And then obviously there is a lot of hype that sort of ends up whipping things into a frenzy. But as you said at the start, I've been in the industry for 15 years. I've been told once every year that tool X is going to replace my job. And yet here I am still doing my job. Like I joke about if we had a real AI that could do exactly what a tester can do right now, we'd have bigger problems than our jobs. Which sounds a bit flippant, but it is true. Like a lot of our abilities as individuals are rooted in like heuristics and like the way we think creatively. These generative AI gives the impression of that, but I don't think it quite hits the mark that we as individuals do.
I share your disappointment. It's hard to admit, but they haven't replaced a lot of things that they were supposed to replace. You did decide to write a book about it, though, so surely there must be something that changed recently, right? I like to call them the hockey stick moments, where things are no longer like they used to be in the past. So would you say that the generative AI is, aside of what you just described, oh, Jesus, I can't even pronounce that, treating them like humans, does that really change how we design the systems? Do you expect this to be like 20 years down the line or 50 years down the line where the archaeologists are looking at the remains of us and the other systems? Are they going to be thinking, oh, wow, yeah, something really changed here with the generative AI, or not necessarily?
It depends on different industries. So the motivation for the book and what really appealed to me is, as I say, AI, for all its sophistication, is still software, it's still a tool. And we use tools to help us in our day-to-day jobs. So what appealed to me was less like the tooling itself, but more the mindset behind it. And as I said, like I like to teach through doing. So I thought a great way to do this is to write a book which shows you how to use generative AI, but infuse it with this mindset of that it is a collaboration between the two of us. It was very much influenced by a book called The Glass Cage by Nicholas Carr. I've been mentioning it quite a lot. I probably mentioned it more than my own book, which I'm clearly doing this wrong. But it's got a really good idea about problems that we face. They can either be heuristic based or algorithmic based. So heuristic based requires creativity, it requires human observation and analysis. But then the algorithmic stuff is step based. And that's where I think the tooling can really help, is in the algorithmic based sort of stuff. So it's as much about teaching people how to use these tools as it is teaching them to identify these opportunities. So things like using them to transform code for you really quickly, to suggest things based on stuff that you've already done. So not asking it to build something for you, but to perhaps enhance the things that you've already done. Using it to transform testing notes as well, that sort of idea. But rather than thinking of it like these tools replacing my role, think of it as my role is made up of many different acts. And which of those acts could this tooling help with, and which ones should still remain in my sphere? So that you end up with this concept of an area of effect. So you're in charge, you make the decisions, you're still using your creative thinking, your analytical skills, but then you're using these tools to get to your conclusion faster or open up ideas in a way that you might not be able to do because you've got your own cognitive biases preventing you from seeing things. So it's that sort of idea, that thing that I'm really interested in. And then working with these tools and seeing how they can actually help you in that space, I think is really fascinating. And I don't see it slowing down anytime soon as well.
So who's the book for? Who's the target audience here?
I think it's for anyone who is interested in quality, interested in testing, and then thinking about how they can use these tools in a way that can assist them with improving their quality, improving their testing abilities, but also people who are slightly wary about these things as well. The way that I've pitched the book, it is neither a completely sort of neo-Luddite, burn them all down, don't touch them, but nor is it saying that just get these machines to do it for you. So I think it's for people who are looking for a sort of center ground, sober look at how these tools can use with concrete examples to demonstrate how you and these tools can work together.
So let's talk about this concrete examples. Maybe let's do two categories. First, what the good use cases are for using things like LLMs in the context of testing, and then we're going to go and talk about the problems and the bad stuff. So what would you say are the top best use cases that you found and you discuss in the book?
So again, with that sort of algorithmic mindset, I find things which have quite clear bounds. The ones that really I've found useful is, for example, in the test automation space or with any sort of code, rather than building prompts, rather than using LLMs to do the whole job, I will pick out specific activities within the process and use the LLMs to do that. So one example that I really like doing is building a prompt that says, build me a page object. So build me my boilerplate. I'll do the behavior part of my automated test, and I'll put the business rules into the test, but you go build me my boilerplate. So I can do something like build a prompt that says, here's a bunch of HTML. I want you to turn this into a Java object using Selenium, Page Factory or something like that. And you drop that HTML in and it will output you a working page object. So I've just saved myself like 5-10 minutes because I'm not writing this all out myself. And then I can move on to do those things. Keeping in the code space as well, I really think an interesting space is the fusion of the Copilot LLMs. So GitHub Copilot, I forget the name, is it Duet? Comes from Google. Google rename everything every 15 minutes, so who knows? It's probably changed by the time this podcast goes out. But those type of code assistant things, the fusion of that with TDD, I think is really interesting. So some of the sort of pushback I've seen in trying to use Copilots to build code is the way that you prompt them. So by putting a code comment in, yes, you can get it to then build you some code, but it's usually not great and you need to fix it up. Whereas I find using TDD, so building unit tests and your unit tests becoming your prompt, can be a really interesting way of actually building your production code, because you write 4 or 5 unit tests that basically describe the behavior of a function or a class or what have you. And then you go to build the production code. All of those unit tests are going to go into the prompt that goes into this large language model, and it's going to bring you back something that's going to be a bit more accurate than if you just asked it straight up like cold, no sort of kind of context. I think those kind of examples are really good. Things like data generation can be really useful as well. If you're working with complex data sets that maybe have certain rules or you have certain masking that you have to put in place, I found that to be quite useful as well. And then the biggest one, I keep talking about exploratory testing because I love it so much, but I find it really interesting in that space as well. Having a collection of prompts that can do different activities for me really quickly, just to speed up my exploratory testing. Build me a little script so I can run it in my browser, generate me some test data, parse this curl script into some other format for me to analyze. It's those targeted specific tasks with a little bit of context in there. It's where you get the real value from it.
How much of your time before generative AI in particular would you say you would spend just writing up test data? Is that like a significant chunk of a tester's life?
It's one of the hardest bits to get right. It's always the most challenging. In terms of the production side, like when you're testing the product, it impacts all of that. If you don't have the test data in place or organized in the right way, then it's going to impact your automation. It's going to impact if you run manual test cases. It's going to impact you if you do your exploratory testing. And if you have slow processes to generate this data as well, that could be really problematic as well. So I think it's a critical factor of testing, regardless of whether you're a tester or you're in a different role. So yeah, seeing how LLMs can help with that sort of stuff is useful. But that's not the full picture. You need the systems in place. You need the hooks into your databases. You need the communication of what the data is and how it's formatted as well. But yeah, it's a real critical aspect of all of it.
So the co-pilot argument really speaks to me. I think that's probably a very similar experience to anybody who's actually writing code using this kind of tools has, that it can make you much more productive if you learn a little bit how to use it and where it excels, when it doesn't. It can be great. It's unlikely to replace you and fire you anytime soon, but that definitely does help. I do wonder though, in the context of AI and testing, for things like UI testing, like visual recognition and knowing which button to click and stuff like that, I'm just speaking from my imagination now. And from the chat-based things, like talking about how should we approach this? Can I go to ChatGPT and say, hey, this is the code base. How should we plan our testing? What do you think? Is it at the stage where it's useful in that way as well, or too early?
I think it's useful in the way that, as I said before, like that area effect model. If I'm driving the planning, then using these tools to kind of review what I'm suggesting and then suggest further things and provide additional analysis, I think they're really useful. I'm reluctant to recommend throwing your code base into it and then saying, come up with all the testing ideas, partially because I just think it's a really expensive way of doing things. If you imagine, a lot of these large language models are based on tokens. So each word or collection of words is a token. If you start throwing your code base into every prompt, you've got thousands, if not tens of thousands of tokens in a single prompt. You're going to burn through your token quota for some platform very quickly. It's not a cost-efficient way. The other factor as well is that, and something we really touched on here, is why context matters in terms of the prompting that you're making. If you say, write me some tests for an upload feature, it's going to use all its generalized training and come up with a generalized output. Whereas if I was to provide like maybe a feature file, like a user story, maybe a screenshot, and say, this is the type of testing that I want to do. These are the risks that I care about. These are the quality characteristics that I'm interested in. Then it will give you something a bit more useful, a bit more targeted. So context is key with putting these things in. But I think crucially, to do that, it still has to come from you. You have to understand what the context is and what are the key aspects of your context to provide into this prompt. So you are doing the prompt, you're already doing the planning, you're already doing the analysis. You'll do 50%, 60% of the work yourself, and then you're using this to sort of push yourself that little further in those sort of contexts. It's less about speed and it's more about opening up your breadth of ideas and observation.
You mentioned prompts a few times. Does one need a PhD in prompt engineering to be good at leveraging AI for testing?
Yeah, I've got 3 PhDs and a master's. No. No. So there's some really useful material out there. I think there's also a lot of bad stuff out there as well. And this kind of feeds back into this hype stuff of, like, I see cheat sheet PDFs where they're just like one-liners. And it's literally just change you are a software tester, you are a developer, you are a blah, do this. But some of the stuff on deeplearning.ai, I think that's the site, but their prompt engineering course is really useful. There's a lot of research papers out there that have done sort of the hard work in terms of determining what are the optimal ways in which we should write prompts as well. So yeah, you don't need a PhD, but you've got to do a little bit of research. And that's something, again, I've infused in the book. I've pulled from those things and then gone, here's some examples of ways in which you can use these tactics and principles that other people have discovered. So it requires a bit more thinking than, you can't just go, It's a garbage in, garbage out situation. You can't just say, write me a test case, write me a test plan. You do need something that's a bit more involved. But you can pick up these principles quite quickly. Because again, it's all in natural language. So it's not like you have to learn a coding language for these things. It's just learning about the way in which you arrange the tokens to optimize your output. I suppose that's another crucial factor of all of this as well, is they don't think like we do. That's a principle of the stochastic parrot. I think that is true, but how good or bad that stochastic parrot is based on like what you put in. So when you're writing prompts, you're thinking about writing prompts to maximize your output from them. You're not writing prompts as if you were talking to another person, because it's not the way that it's working. There's a mindset aspect as well as some of the features to consider.
Yeah, and you described pretty accurately what my LinkedIn feed looks like at the moment. It's probably at least 30% PDFs of 20 prompts that you can't live without anymore. That are going to turn your life around, help you lose weight, and be much happier with your job.
So yeah, as a reference, in those sort of PDFs, you'll see 20 in a page or 50 in a page. One of my prompt examples in the book, probably half a page just for one prompt, because you do have to put that detail in. You do have to make the effort to describe things. You can't just put a one-liner in and expect miracles to happen.
And there you go. So that's my call to action then. Go to manning.com, find the book. It's called AI Assisted Testing, and it includes 20 best prompts. I'm just kidding. It includes different tactics that you can use to make your prompts better. It's also available in the Manning Early Access program, the MEEP. So just like I did a couple of days ago, you can go and read through the available chapters, which I believe are about 2/3 of them right at the moment. Mark, let's switch gears a little bit to the bad stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's talk about what you've tried to use AI and generative AI in particular to do with testing, and what sucked and what you wouldn't recommend trying.
So I think I touched on this already, but the place where it sucks the most is when you defer most of the responsibility to the LLM. So things like trying to get it to write the whole of an automated test. So I remember the first time I did it and I was like, wow, it's written the whole test for me. That's fantastic. And then I copied it across and it compiled. And I was like, that's even more incredible. And then I ran it and it failed. And it failed because all of the selectors didn't match what was going on in terms of my web page. So I fixed all those. And then it still failed. And it failed because it hadn't even taken into account the fact that there were validation rules on the input fields and things like that. So it was putting too little amount of data into one of the fields, caused it to fail there as well. So it goes back to my point again of context. Trying to get large language models to do quite complex, broad things, even like writing an automated test, can be quite challenging. And you end up in a bit of a trap where you're like, oh, brilliant, I've built the code. And then before you know it, you've rewritten half of it. If you're rewriting half of it, then don't do it in the first place. So being targeted and specific in different places there. I think what was also quite challenging as well has been playing around with some of the more advanced features. So working with retrieval augmented generation and fine tuning as well. That's been quite interesting, but I've made a lot of mistakes along the way in terms of setting up test data, like the data that you would train a model on, for example, or things like relevancy tools to determine what sort of information should go in your prompt for you. They are very attractive looking things, and it's well worth having a bit of experimentation in that space to learn more about them. But also it's fraught with dangers. They aren't super easy to pick up. They do require a bit of skill and knowledge and a bit of practice to get your hands with. And then what underpins all of this is hallucinations. Again, garbage in, garbage out. And your garbage out isn't going to be garbled text. It's going to be really confident, incorrect stuff. And I opened the book, first chapter, first page. I asked an LLM to write me an introductory paragraph for the chapter. And it confidently writes about a book that does not exist. And it selects a couple of authors who are legitimate authors who have written books, but they've never written a book together, and they haven't written this book that the LLM suggests that it has. So we have to be so careful. And again, this back to the area of effect model. It's a relationship. We have to have healthy skepticism of the output as well.
For anybody who's going to pick up the book, one of the things I liked about it is that Mark starts with that description coming from ChatGPT, and he only mentions that book doesn't actually exist like 2 chapters later, which is a massive troll, and I really appreciate that. So well done on that.
It was my opening gambit.
Yeah, exactly. So I was going to ask you also about the kind of typical wrench in the works that is in the indeterministic nature of what we get working with LLMs. And I'm guessing it must be like doubly infuriating when working with tests, when we like everything neat and we don't like to rerun tests and get them flaky and sometimes work, sometimes don't. What's the best way of dealing with the lack of determinism in this generative AI?
I think you have to accept it. I think that to fight against it is foolish. I remember things are a lot better in the JavaScript world, but I used to ask people, why do you want to build automation on a platform that is asynchronous? Why are you trying to build synchronous code in an asynchronous platform? And it's the same sort of thing with this, is that if you want something deterministic to happen, then trying to do it on an indeterministic system is just folly. You're just looking to make your life more difficult. So again, I think if your scope is very small and very specific, say for example, I wanted it to generate like a bunch of SQL for me. So I've described in text, I would like a SQL statement to insert all these records into the database. This is what's in the table. Something like that is very specific, so it doesn't have a lot of scope to kind of hallucinate and go off the rails because you've been very specific. But if you're trying to do anything that's more in the heuristic space, then lean into the indeterministic stuff. Lean into the fact that it is like a suggestion engine. It's reacting to what's going on at that moment. Because I think that you're going to get more value from that rather than saying, I want to be at a point where every time I send the same prompt, I get the same output. Because that's not the purpose of these tools. Yeah, you're just building a rod for your own back at that point. If you want a tool to do something deterministic for you, go use a deterministic tool. If you want something that can, something where you can set boundaries with it, but it can still be creative within those boundaries. I don't really like using the word creative there because it's not creativity, but something where there's some sort of kind of scope for change in there, but you can set the boundaries quite clearly. Then it's always thinking about what's your problem first, and then what sort of tooling could be useful for you. Because some of the examples I give in the book, and maybe doing myself a disservice here, but you could use it to generate test data, but there's lots of other test data generation tools out there elsewhere that you could use as well. I would say it's a success if you read the book and went, this isn't for me in this given context, because I think then you're looking at the tools in the right way. You're thinking about them in a sober way, so that when you do come to use them, you use them in the right way and get the value that you want from them.
When is the book coming out? When are the remaining chapters coming out? And when is it landing on Amazon?
So the first draft of the book is written and it's been handed in. It's going into its final round of reviews. And then depending on that, we will have a bit more editing to do, and then it will go into productions. It's tricky sometimes with these things because it's come to that point now where it's in the publisher's hands. But I'm hopeful that we'll see it in autumn in all its glory. But as you said, it's all available on Meep, and they're releasing a new chapter each month. And I think, like I say, I think 2/3, I think part 1 and part 2 are pretty much released. So there's only 2-3 chapters left to be released before we get to the sort of final production. But yeah, most of the sort of hard work has been done.
Awesome. So now that we've made fun of some of the prior predictions about how things were going to replace people and stuff like that, what's coming, I'm going to ask you for your predictions so that we can make fun of them 5 years down the line. Where do you see this going? What do you think is going to be different in the world of testing with how we're progressing with the AI and anything else really in the, let's say, mid to 5 to 10 years horizon? What would you expect to see?
It's such a difficult question to ask in this sort of space because things are moving so quickly. I remember when I was about halfway through the book and there was all that drama around OpenAI nearly being shut down and Sam Altman being ousted.
Yeah.
And I was like, please don't shut down OpenAI. I would have to rewrite all my examples with a different LLM. Purely selfish. But I think it just goes to show us the pace at which everything is moving. There could be outlier things that appear in the next sort of 5 to 10 years that we don't know. But I'd say when I look to the future, I look back to the past. I think that there's probably two things that come out of this. I think initially there's going to be a bit of a shrug. I think we're feeling that already, where we've seen, wow, it's amazing. But then it turns out there is a bit of a learning curve. Not a massive learning curve, but there's a little bit of a learning curve. Because of that, some people are like, no, going, oh, these tools are useless. Can't use them. But I think it will split into two places. You'll have people who understand how to use these tools and can use them effectively in their workflows and in their sort of kind of tool chain. I think also as well, we'll probably see a lot of cynical attitudes. Unfortunately, we said at the start, what is testing? And there is still this perspective of that testing is just test cases. So you are going to see tooling companies out there that are going, oh, well, we can do all your testing for you because we can just generate all the test cases for you. And I just don't see them being massively successful because either they're going to be crazy expensive to run, or they're going to do part of it, but there's still so much more in the continuous testing model that needs to be done as well. My hope is that people start to bring these into their tool chains and use them in the right effective manners, but I don't see them necessarily replacing us anytime soon, even though we're probably going to see some companies out there, investor backed, who are going to be promising 30 to 40% efficiencies of X, Y, and Z. Only because we've seen that happen in the past with every other sort of jump of technology as well.
Let's take a quick look backwards then. Since talking about the future is so difficult, would you recommend the path that you've taken of a software tester to a 5-year-old version of yourself who might be considering becoming a musician?
Yeah, interesting. Because I feel like a lot of what I learned in music actually informs my testing. I would probably advise a 5-year-old me to just continue having a healthy interest in computers, but also having a healthy interest in creativity as well. I think the best testers, they're made up of not just the sort of technical abilities, but they're also made up of those creative abilities, those sort of humanistic abilities as well. So yeah, I probably would still convince the 5-year-old me to continue playing on the Atari 400 whilst listening to Dire Straits at the same time.
There you go. So that's the winning combination, Atari and Dire Straits, everybody. Anybody listening to that
That's
with kids?
Showing my age there.
Yeah, you might need to update the console, but Dire Straits is still there, not losing out on anything. All right. Thank you so much, Mark. This was amazing. For anybody looking for the book again, it's available at manning.com. It's called AI Assisted Testing, and it's available in the MEEP section. This was Mark Winteringham, and thank you very much. I'll see you next time.